Greg Moss, it's always good to see your smiling face. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing well, Alex. Always good to see you too.
I know that there's so much that we could talk about every time we're together, and we do cover a range of topics. But I know, our last conversation on the UPSTACK podcast, we were talking about power and AI, and the fact that AI seems like this onion, a many-layered onion you peel back only to reveal more that you want to dig deeper into. But
Let's not forget the hype cycle, right? We're sitting
and,
in a
and the hype cycle, yes, the rush to the hype cycle, and that last conversation. I mean, there's so many different directions we could go in coming out of that last episode, but there is something about that rush for scale that AI has brought on, and crypto still. Let's not forget about crypto. And with that rush, just the demands for power. If we thought the demand for power was great before, here comes technology that, while it's been around for a while, it seems to be evolving even faster. And what does that mean? What does that mean for data center providers in particular? Like, how are they handling that load, that ever
these are
increasing demand?
these are fantastic
Um,
questions, and I'm really happy and excited about who we have here today to talk about these things.
we have got, I'd like to think you and I were separated at birth, but this will be our first four-person podcast. But more about our guests momentarily, because when we talk about the rush for power, uh, I think sustainability, given the current green landscape, I think is some terminology you use in our preparation for today's conversation. Sustainability and efficiency certainly come to mind, and climate change, the impact on our changing climate, and it really begs the question: how does sustainability and efficiency factor in to a number of different things, including reducing the cost of technology for businesses and in many other ways. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to bring in some, as we always do, some real subject matter experts to peel a few layers back of the Upstack podcast onion. So while we weren't separated at birth, I'm happy to report, nor were our guests. So today we are very happy to welcome a dynamic duo who happen to be brothers. Not only brothers, but I am told, we'll have to see, identical twins. So joining us today on the Upstack podcast are Jacob and Zach Smith. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Great to see you. Yeah, doing great. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Greg.
Great to see you. Allow me to talk about you for a little bit. So
Carry
Zach
on.
and Jacob, you are co-founders of Packet, the digital infrastructure company, which I
Yeah.
believe was acquired, what was it, 2020, by our friends at Equinix, the global data center provider. Jacob, you in particular, we're focusing on integrating and scaling what would become Equinix Metal. And I think you led other various aspects of their go-to-market strategy and marketing. So we have a connection on that front. We can talk shop in the post show. But your focus was on customer success and product-led growth. Um, Give me a beat.
Big words there, Alex. Big
Yes,
words.
yes. Focusing primarily on customer success and product-led growth for startups, developers, and open source. And on that front, Zach, you were also at Equinix, given you're a co-founder of Packet when it was acquired, and you headed up, I think it was Edge Infrastructure during your time there, having recently left, both of you. But you've also been spending the last, was it 4 to 5 years with Open 19, the Open 19 Foundation, which is certainly something we should talk more about today because it's very much related to today's subject. And at Open 19, you're leading innovation in data center hardware and finding sustainability standards for the industry. Greg, we nailed it yet again
I think so.
with two guests, let alone one.
Two for one special for you guys, right?
So
Okay, just today.
exactly. So welcome again. We're going to tackle. I don't know how you feel about onions, but we're going to start peeling here. And as I always like to do, you're the subject matter experts. Greg, I'm going to include you in that bucket.
Thank you.
It's helpful just to set the table for our listener, or hopefully listeners. But I think it's helpful when it comes to this idea of sustainability and efficiency in the data center space, getting a sense of the present landscape. So what is the state of sustainability today as it relates to data centers?
I think we should have Zach to do this one first. It feels like right up his alley. You know?
Boom.
I was kind of surprised, Alex. You started the whole thing by introducing Jacob and Zach Smith, and I'm just so used to
I did
Zach
that on
and
purpose.
Jacob Smith. And
See?
I like it. It feels good.
Jacob, he's got marketing chops, so he's gonna get the shine here, the long overlooked marketer. But
Well,
Zach, you
we
want to lead
are.
this one?
Yeah, the truth is we are identical twins. I'm an hour and 20 minutes older, so I am Jacob's older brother, even by just a smidgen.
That's
So
quite a delta. 80 minutes.
yeah, I don't know if we got enough time in this podcast to like debunk the challenges and retro on that with my mom, but we can
Well,
invite her on for a little bit more.
should we bring her in now or should we wait? Okay.
I think it would be a lot longer than 90 minutes we got. But yeah, man, I'd love to cover some of the kind of sustainability topic within data center. And broadly, I'm going to call it digital infrastructure, right? Some of us on this call have happened to spend a bunch of our career in data centers, building data centers, running data centers, using data centers,
Putting
all that
things in
kind
and
of
out of
stuff,
data centers, all
putting
that
them in
stuff.
and
Yeah.
out. But the vast majority of the humans in this world don't really care, right, about data centers. In fact, it's largely invisible, which I think is a testament to our industry overall. Infrastructure is generally invisible to most people, and data centers, although we have seen them in the news, recently, picket fence in, certain markets or whatnot, they kind of like most of the, I actually teach a fourth grade class occasionally on this, and most people think the entire cloud and data center exists on their iPad, until you kind of walk them through it and they start thinking about buildings they've passed in Manhattan or down the New Jersey Turnpike, and they're like, oh, all those air conditioning's on top. I bet that's probably not, a warehouse. But I think the state of data centers today is in a ton of flux, right? And as it relates to sustainability, I think the big focus in our world has been, rightfully so, on power, right? It's a big thing of what we do, which is how much power can we get? Do we have enough? Is it in the right places? I always say that getting a good data center requires three things: great power, great connectivity, and a great location, and you usually get two out of three. Power availability has become kind of a major challenge and issue for an industry that's just growing at kind of an exorbitant rate. But like a whole other part of sustainability. That would be what in my world would be kind of scope one utilization for a data center company would be the power that is using. But then there's water, right, which has become, a pretty hot button issue. Most data centers are air cooled. They're air cooled with evaporative cooling, which takes a large amount of water, especially depending upon the temperature ranges and, both inside and outside the data center, the differentials and kind of different environmental concerns. And then there's just the wider concept of waste, right? Vast majority of enterprise data centers, I think we've done a lot of improvements over the years with cloud, have very low utilization of the things within it, right? So they're constantly operating at, 2, 3, 4% utilization. I think cloud is much better. I don't have any specific numbers, but we certainly saw quite a bit working at Equinix. And seeing some of the workload that our customers were doing that was making that a little bit more efficient. But there's still just a massive efficiency game within the utilization of infrastructure itself. And then you have the actual components, the things that are making it, the computers, the servers, the chips, the stuff. And we always think, I heard a great statistic a couple years ago that 70% of the carbon impact of a computer is making the computer. 20% of the carbon impact is running the computer for its entire life. And 10% is kind of like, getting rid of it, destruction, recycling, et cetera. So like you think about that and we see this big focus on utilization of power, which is important and big and relevant. But there's a whole other side as it relates to sustainable supply chain, recycling, circularity that I think is becoming more omnipresent within our space. I don't know if that answered your question, man, but like
No,
usually
it
when
does.
somebody asks me a broad one, I take it.
I only ask broad questions. I leave the technical questions to Greg.
Alex, you got to be careful though. You've got two musician, performer, ex-career people here. So you give us the mic, like we're probably going to use it.
Alex, Zach committed to doing a little to finish this off with a little.
I got the bass in the other room. I actually
that could be the new theme song for the UPSTACK podcast. I think it's only fitting with Greg Moss's vocal overlay. Yeah,
Yeah, my heavy Bronx vocal. So
Can I give
Zach,
you guys a slightly different take before we
yeah,
move on, Greg?
Please.
Anyone?
love
Yes.
that.
I mean,
I
Apple
love
had
that.
some event like, was it yesterday or the day before? What's today? Thursday? It was 2 days
Something.
ago.
Yeah, there's
Apple does the,
USB-C. Yeah.
yeah, some fun. I thought it was fascinating because I went yesterday to go look at it because, might as well have one last cord in the house, right? And I was looking on the website because they want you to pre-buy it now, so you can buy it. Like you package it all up, so you can click buy the moment they announce or let you click it in a week or so. And pretty prominent on the page was this sustainability report for each of the products that they launched, and it was pretty detailed. It wasn't just we are broadly green, but so pretty much down to like components which are recycled, percentage of carbon, all the kinds of different stats you would expect, but at a pretty detailed level. And I think my point there is that this is just in the consciousness of consumers. Obviously, as Zach said, data centers are kind of invisible to people, but it's a part of our technology world that's unavoidable. And so, to answer your question a slightly different way, is that people just care about it, and obviously, we need to care about it. But it's becoming a business differentiator. Like the ability to kind of do better there isn't just greenwashing; it's going to be a competitive advantage, and not just a cost. And so, I think that's really interesting to see a company like Apple, how do they maintain a premium product and a premium experience? Some of it's in their design and their packaging and their marketing, and some of it's in their supply chain management and 2030 goals, and showing that in a really compelling way. So I bring that to the table because I think it's inevitable to hit our industry, and we see it a little bit in some of the clouds. Google Cloud has a nice little "Would you like to get the lower carbon impact VM?" Just kind of bubbling that up, and I think we're just at the very beginning of a rapid cycle there, probably as rapid, if not more so, than what we've seen with AI moving from a cool idea to like a thing people want
It's a
in
great
their
point.
life.
So
Jacob, I think the point there that is so fascinating to me is that we're seeing like a significant amount of leadership there in consumer B2C businesses, right? Apple being a great example, like I'm sure, you buy a, thing of soap, it's going to have, there's probably a product manager of sustainability at, every consumer goods company or a whole team. And what we've typically seen in the digital infrastructure space is sustainability primarily be more of a legal or finance, like regulatory compliance, maybe investor compliance to comply with new stuff coming out with, shareholder needs and whatever. But I've seen even like, I think the first company I know of in our kind of B2B space is Cisco, which has, Denise Lee leading head of sustainability product. And this is like, how do you bring the benefits of a circular and sustainable way
so
to end
save
users and customers?
so save that because I remember you specifically talking about a circular economy, and that's going to be a little bit further down in the show. But I do want to go back to your original point about these data centers and how does a data center like an Equinix, take large components of their facility and make it more sustainable, right? And are there economic benefits, technical benefits? Like I want to understand that at a data center level. We're going to get to the consumer product level later, but I'm very curious.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways that we can peel back this onion, and Alex got me all kinds of hungry. I'm thinking onion dip and Super Bowl. I don't know, whatever. But if we peel this onion in a couple of ways, like actually the last few years with what I'm going to call the energy crisis in Europe with the Ukraine conflict and kind of the related reaction there, really made this like not just how do I say, a nice to do thing, a checkbox or a green bond or whatever. It's like it turned it into actually making a lot of sense financially, right? Because you had this massive energy costs that were very, very difficult for not only the providers, but the end users or the customers. And then in many cases, you just couldn't get any energy. And it's still the case. There's this large gap between the demand and the supply. And so there's this race for efficiency, which is awesome. Right. And so I think there's just a pure like lever here going on in terms of it makes financial sense, just like we've seen in like solar power in the kind of utility space, right? It makes financial sense to have a more efficient data center. Okay. But there's a couple of other aspects here that are at play. And I really want to separate the difference between single tenant data center solutions and multi-tenant data center solutions, right? Because in a single tenant data center solution, whether it's a large enterprise or a hyperscale or they have control over the workload, right? They know what they're putting into it. They know and can optimize things around maybe kind of a vertical implementation of cooling. Maybe they can, singularly like raise the temperature within the data center for things like that, right? They have a lot of control from end to end, right? But when you're in a multi-tenant solution, you really have very little control, right? You might actually have contractual guarantees, which is something I know we worked on at Equinix, which is working with the industry to kind of raise temperatures that we could within the ambient side of intake to meet ASHRAE guidelines, which was work we had to do throughout, 10,000 plus customer contracts to make sure that we weren't SLA or guaranteeing an intake temperature in a certain way, right? Things like that, even though we knew the equipment, standards for the past decade have a higher thermal intake, there was like issues related to implementing just a more efficient way for us and for the customer. And so some of these things, are just kind of complex ways that we deal with efficiencies in a multi-tenant world where you don't control all the components. And so there has been.
Can I tag on that, Zach, or are you done? Because I have
No,
a quick interjection there. Because I think that is an important point, not only like single tenant, multi-tenant, but hyperscale and everyone else, right? And so when we get to everyone else, they need a lot of help. They need a lot of help with a lot of things, but including, we've had this nice dividing line, like, hey, we'll build the data center, or we'll build the data center in the cage, or we'll provide the power. But, after that, like, you kind of got to do a lot yourself. And I think we've seen, broadly speaking, enterprises, but let's just say anyone who values technology as a core part of their business, but is not a hyperscale scale, needing a lot of help from the
almost
industry.
everybody, right?
Which is almost everyone, right? and so whether they're brand new and they got $1 billion in venture funding, or they're 100 years old and they're transitioning, their business in meaningful ways, they need a lot of help. These are areas of expertise, and I think one thing we observed, especially Zach noted the power issues in Europe, very dynamic market, super complicated. Gosh, customers just needed our help. Like, they were glad that we were working that angle of, pre-buying power and understanding the mix of it and how to make it, yes, more sustainable and efficient and cheaper and whatever. I think that opens up the box a little bit when it comes to things like, well, what are you doing within the rack? How are you cooling your stuff? How are you utilizing it? They're going to need help from data center providers, people like Cisco and Dell, MSPs, clouds. They're all playing a role, I think, in helping to, frankly, move the needle on something that's just too complex for most companies aren't scaled at that. They're just not. You talked about scale at the beginning. They are not scaled on these issues, and they need our industry scale to come together and support them.
How many enterprise companies have thermal engineers on staff?
We'll release an informal poll. I'm curious, Zach, you talked about the race for efficiency. But on the flip side, Jacob, you're talking about, I'm hearing with your Apple example, and you're kind of reading our mind on the questions, consumer expectation. I'm not going to give you my money unless you meet certain standards and environmental standards. I'm curious, who's leading there? Is it the consumer driving change on the business side, or the race for efficiency and potential cost savings and alternate energy sources is driving the business forward, or is it a mix of both?
You're asking the question to a revenue guy here. So yes, marketing, but really, the way Zach and I often divided the business when we worked on it together was front of house, back of house. And I really like the front side of a restaurant, right? Everything from, getting you to the restaurant, to taking your coat, to giving you your bill, right? That part of the customer experience is my jam. And I'm a little biased. I think that we've kind of worked through a big cycle of cloud, right? Cloud has been enormously impactful. It's changed everyone's expectations. What they want cloud. They want that thing, right? They want operated stuff. But we've moved a lot of the generic workload. And I don't mean that like it's not important workload. It's just a lot of the stuff that's like fairly normalized. And as we get into the non-generic, we're generally talking about revenue generating workload versus cost workload, right? ITE, things that are like, okay, I want to compress that now. So there's definitely an efficiency angle, but I think we're going to see more and more just because of the stage of the cycle we're in. And we see a little bit of that with AI, which isn't like, oh, I must save my AI costs. It's like, no, I must differentiate and grow and adopt. Otherwise, I'm going to not be able to pursue my revenue goals. opportunity be a driver for these things as much, if not more, because I do think that digital infrastructure, and this is kind of, long-standing opinion on this side of the fence, is that, at scale, things become more specialized. Hardware and software start being integrated together. They're not generic, right? People care about them. Most businesses are becoming more digital. Digital is getting to be less generic and more specialized. Ergo, you're going to care a lot about both sides of it. And we're going to have to surround I'd say more of the product and revenue conversations with the advantages, not just the sort of cost reductions, although that's a huge part of profitability and certainly going to be a big driver.
Jacob, you're punching on something there. I usually use something like the bell curve workload. It's almost like the bell curve workload had gone with the mass market numbers. Like 80% of companies did mainly the same stuff, right? Which is run a web app, like have kind of SQL data stores and do some storage, right? Like 80% of companies did 80% of their workload with kind of the same stuff. And now you're seeing it very differently. It's the anti-bell curve, right? Which is like a small number of companies consume the vast majority of infrastructure on a few very specific things, right? And the best, longest serving example is like wireless, telco, right? There's only 4 wireless companies in the US, and they spend, billions, tens of billions of dollars a year on IT, and it's super, super specific to only those 4 companies. Yeah. And there's no bell curve there, which is why it's pretty hard to do like telco cloud and related, right? Like 5G in the cloudy kind of stuff when your radios and your processors and your things and your millions of subscribers are very unique to you. And I think we're seeing more businesses like that. I think like smart cars and IoT things and like, I'm waiting for the, Apple VR thingamajiggers and related. They're not going to be normal at all. And yet they're going to be a massive technology driver. And so I think we're just going to see more and more businesses operate a space that's highly specialized in anti-bell curve. And that's really different than the kind of generic mass market supermarket stuff we've had in cloud that has benefited most kind of, what do you call it, Jacob? Like cost driving, normally compressed workload of what we had over the past 20 years.
So I think that's great, right? An anti-bell curve allows us for more control, right? If the masses are doing something a certain way in a big way, like a PUE of 1.2 or whatever it is, right? A hyperscale single-tenant data center gives us control, right? But let's still talk about, because that's a nice world that we're, I guess, heading towards, but there's still tons and tons of companies.
There's a lot of gaps between that and our little dreamy there.
Correct. And Jacob, you brought up a good point earlier where you start talking about people that are interested in whether it's the thermal or the energy or the efficiency or whatever, right? However, I have 100 clients, right? And there's only 2 of my clients that are talking about green, sustainability, or caring, right? And I've noticed that both of those organizations are larger, on the larger size, and seem to have some sort of mandate, right? So the question becomes, I don't think anybody, if you look at a list of 10 priorities when selecting infrastructure, a lot of the smaller mid-sized companies, I mean, that's probably number 99, right? So how do we, where's the world going? How do we create, or entice these
I'll give you
people?
some different data points there, Greg. When I was at Equinix, I was, hanging out with the CRO leadership team, helping them adopt product-led growth and do lots of different things around operated infrastructure. And one stat I found interesting is we went from serving, 10 to 20, sustainability reports per year, custom, like, hey, I need this big partnership with Salesforce that was public about that years ago, to doing like 1,200, so I would say it matters. The question is it, Apple's a great example because they're Apple, biggest, most profitable company in the world, but also based in California, who this week was passing legislation, as they often do, ahead of the national curve around Scope 3. So it's probably no surprise. Apple wasn't like, what I should do is be the best steward. They know it's coming, right? It's coming to regulate them. And some of this is going to simply be driven by requirements versus preference. So we could all...
Are we there?
You're 98 customers. Well, no, we probably are not. But I mean, SEC is talking about Scope 3 right now in Congress, and that's like a problem, and it's probably going to get watered down, but it's somewhat inevitable. And the question is it's also impossible for companies to do right now. I mean, that's really probably why they're not asking for it, but they're going to start leaning on their vendors, right?
Yeah.
Their suppliers are going to get the pressure. So
listed companies are already being forced into it. We saw that in the RFP side. Pretty much top of every listed company was there because they have to start reporting carbon impact. They, and they're subject. Most of these are global businesses. I'll give you a little anecdote. We're required to we got a regulation one of my last months at Equinix where it was some thing that came from the city of Amsterdam saying you must, because you have servers, computers, not data centers, you have computers in the city of Amsterdam, you must report the power saving mode of every computer on a quarterly basis that resides within the city of Amsterdam to us in this format.
Wow.
Was it possible to do? No, it wasn't possible to do. They're like, but you have all the computers, so you must tell us that because we really don't have enough energy and we need everything to be more efficient. That's like a local city law, right? I mean, who knows how they would do it, all the other things, but this is it's going to happen, right? Whether it's at a big, nice, convenient federal level, or it's individual little places,
Singapore.
Ashburn, Virginia says hey, we want this to be this way. Singapore is a great example. Why do we have a Singapore data center problem? Because basically they're we're not going to issue any more permits unless you all do these things this way. And so I think that this is coming, and smart companies or those that are investing, Greg, for the long term, because it's a critical differentiator for the future of their entire company versus we need this to be cheaper because IT is expensive.
Yeah.
Those companies, if they're thinking ahead 5 years and they got a board and they're what are we going to, we must do better here. We must start understanding what our carbon impact is. Resources really matter. How are we going to report and account for it? How are we going to reduce it? And a lot of companies, have taken bold steps like net zero goals. How would they get there? Right? I always like to use the 2030 net zero goals for companies who have 5 to 7 year refresh cycles on their computers and haven't started yet. I was like, I believe it's 2023, almost 4.
You're inside the window. Yeah.
Right. I'm so, and I think it'd be hard pressed for any company to be able to report accurately on their scope 1 or scope 2, let alone their scope 3 on every single carbon impact of every single component in their supply chain.
Understand.
Yeah. So I think it's coming for the vendors. It's a great opportunity for service providers and other people in the ecosystem to start stepping up with actual offerings and products. And this was what I was trying to make earlier, which is I personally don't believe, and Alex, you mentioned something like green energy cheaper. I was like, right, actually not. More value. We're going to do more for you. And there's a huge burden. I think was the biggest, opportunities I see right now in the data center space is move this from we have to do this reporting for you so that you will buy our existing product into there is a set of value that we're providing for you that is worth a lot. And we're going to charge you to deliver this offering, this new service. And I just don't see how the investments can be made without actually turning this into a product and a monetization angle.
Wow.
Yeah, especially since it's not, we're at a REIT, right? Equinix is a REIT. They led the industry in terms of that kind of structure. And so there's a lot of thinking that goes into kind of 20-year cycles of buildings that tend to get more valuable over time. And obviously, as you think about refresh cycles on, I don't know, NVIDIA H100s, that don't last for 20 years, let alone two.
The need to pump that stock's going to dictate that for sure.
Yeah, but also just like the technology, technology is going to change. And so we've been putting stuff into data centers for a long time and kind of letting it work its way out over time. But obviously you look at hyperscale and, they're going on 3-year cycles at Meta. And that's like refreshing all of it.
Yeah.
Because of advantages, reasons, whatever. There's kind of another flank here where we've got this circular part that's going to matter a lot more as we start turning the estate over. And that gives us opportunity as well, right? It gives us opportunity to reinvent what we're doing. But, it's hard to be agile with physical things. We have to, you can't just apply agile method, to hardware. It's difficult. The cycles are long. It takes time to build physical stuff.
RM-RF the data center and recreate it.
Yeah, not so much.
Let's dig into circular, because that's come up a few times. Circular economy, to me, that brings to mind things, hardware, laptops, iPhones. Some people get a new phone every year, some every 2, if not more. Potentially a significant amount of tech waste. Where does that go? How is the circular economy currently applying to data centers specifically?
Can I start,
Zach?
Jacob? I
Zach.
just want to say something. I think in some ways, both cloud and data centers have really moved the needle on circularity. Both are recurring revenue businesses. They're paid for outcomes, not widgets. So things in an as a service model, in my personal viewpoint, cause an economic reason to pay attention to the right things. Like who has the cost of operating an inefficient data center? A data center company. And they like don't get new money for that. It's not like they charged an NRE, built a data center and walked away, right? They have to operate it. And so I think that's good because it causes the right kind of tie between economic outcomes and like efficiency and whatnot. So I think the as a service model has been a great boon, both in cloud and in kind of data centers in general. I think really where we're struggling is that when I look at the carbon impact of a square foot of data center, certainly significant amount in, core plant and equipment, concrete, and all the other things that go into building the actual building. But then you put like, millions of dollars per square foot of hardware into those things that all have a significant carbon impact. And right now, I think the biggest opportunity is to introduce, first and foremost, we started the conversation with this concept like the cloud is mainly invisible. And you said something like a laptop. If I get a laptop, I'm like pretty conditioned not to throw that in the trash can, right? I take it to e-waste. There's city programs. Dell's going to take it back. I can go to Staples. Like there's a lot, and my kids know lithium ion batteries are bad. Like don't put those in the trash. Like there's lots of things built into it. And I suspect there's actually cost structures built into it from a consumer standpoint that like get paid for as part of those recycling programs and take backs and other things like
You
that.
like to trade in your iPhone when you upgrade. I mean, it is part of the
Or
process.
some great product management, which is like, would you like to? And I'm pretty sure Apple's not taking that iPhone and throwing it in the trash. They're doing it and like taking apart all the pieces, melting out and all the palladium, and putting it back into a new iPhone. But that's not happening in the data center, right? Which is right now, most people think of the data center as you put stuff in it, and oh my gosh, I hope I never see it again, right? And we found it to be one of the biggest issues we have in a multi-tenant data center is like getting rid of the equipment. Like what happens when you're done? Right. But first off, nobody knows. It's all kinds of a hodgepodge of, kind of deconstruction slash disposal companies. You don't really get to return it to the manufacturer. There are no programs, as far as I'm aware of, that you can reasonably expect to like click a button and take back all your things to different OEMs and ODMs and cable manufacturers and things like that. And so I think it's kind of the dirty little secret of the cloud because it's out of sight, out of mind. And I think it's an opportunity that we can really, I think one of the easiest, most awesome, if all you data center people are out there, please introduce a paid recycling program. Like charge your colocation customers money for destructing and recycling back to the OEMs, the hardware in the data center. Like they will love to pay, right? There's some issues there, like data destruction and very like put screws through my hard drives, but there's all kinds of issues that we need to work through. But it seems like one of the biggest opportunities is appropriately recycle. The hardware by it's not free, right? So like
you walk out of Whole Foods, right? And there's 3 bins there for compost, for paper, for trash. So again, I know it's dumbed down substantially, but same concept. I mean, there's one data center out there that's doing this, and it's Iron Mountain. They happen to have a disposal portion.
Yeah, they bought a company that did that.
And it's not even promoted properly. So I couldn't agree with you guys more. And I think it starts here. Should they be fined or should they be required at some level to do something? It's a revenue generator. I mean, you said it yourself,
well,
Zach.
I think that very soon you're going to start to see procurement sides and related force the suppliers to be like, I am not buying that computer unless you give a way for me to give it back. Like you have to guarantee your scope 3 supply chain for me. So like, how are we dealing with this?
I'm not taking that on from you. I mean, that's not something you want to buy with your brand new server is the long tail emissions problem. And you want someone else to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's going to be push and pull there. It's going to go to the OEMs and whatnot. Certainly they can't burden it. So I think it's going to be an awesome opportunity for the data center operators to be like, guess what? We created a program and you can, for only $100 a month per rack, we will put on your, end of life protection program, right? Which works with these 10 OEMs and we take care of it in a sustainable way. And we know that it's not going to end up in a landfill. Like, we know that it's not going to just get trashed by some random provider. I think it's an
I think
awesome
this is all in
opportunity.
the bucket of they need more help, right? Again, we go to hyperscalers. We had companies like IT Renew, which I think was the one you guys were talking about with Iron Mountain. Did a great job taking hyperscaler 3-year refresh stuff and turning it into valuable bits for enterprises because they're like, cool, it's like half price, 3-year-old stuff. I love it. That's not the growth of the future, right? That's an important part of the supply chain, which is fairly homogenous, right? And yet, as we look again at the kind of the rest of it, which I think the rest of it is not just like, a dog's breakfast. This is actually really valuable, and we can create thousands of companies innovating with technology. They're going to need a lot of help to do it, right? Not just from a regulatory standpoint, but they got to move faster, right? They got to be able to take advantage of that H100, and whatever, right? And so I think there's a lot to it, and my general sensibility on it, Greg and Alex, is that at some level, every enterprise becomes a service provider or has one within them or borrows one from someone else to do their thing technology-wise at scale. And that's going to include a lot of this efficiency, circularity, sustainability stuff because you're going to have to be expert at it in order to lead the market in it. If it's not important to you, you're going to push it on someone else and hope it goes away. I don't think that's a long-term option, long-term, 5 years, 10 years max, right?
And so the last little change I wanted to point on there related to the circularity aspect was the business model shift, right? It's already happening with OEMs who are coming out with as a service offerings, which means they own the asset. So now they're much more attuned to, well, how do I retrofit that piece of hardware versus trying to sell a new piece of hardware? How do I extend the life of the asset versus trying to give you the new model every year? You can see the whole way that our industry works is like, yeah, all that stuff I sold you last year, yeah, that's no good. This year's model is the best. And I look at like the most staid, industry in the world, like automobiles, who has like how many different ways can you choose to utilize an automobile? You can buy one, you can lease one, you can finance it, you can get it via Uber, you can get a rental car. Like they even have like subscription programs from a couple of companies. Like there's lots of ways to like have access to we have like one way to get access to a server. It's either like cloud or like buy it. And so now we're starting to see this whole like a little bit of a subscription model, HP, GreenLake, Dell Apex. Cool. That means those OEMs are going to care a lot more about how it's made, how I can take it back, how long I can use it for, how the refresh cycle. And then that will also push to the silicon manufacturers who currently do not have kind of any note. I don't think any of them have subscription revenue of note on their P&Ls when they report their quarterly revenues. But like eventually, wouldn't we want, Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, like they sell you access to their IP, a processor or whatever. Like, wouldn't it be great if they actually made more money if you used it longer? Like right now they make less, right? Because they can't sell you something new. And like that is, in my opinion, the big shift that will have to happen if we want circularity to become real. Like we can't overcome those kind of the industrial logic of the major part of our industry, silicon and OEMs, not having a subscription model. They got to move to that. And if they do, like it's going to change the entire, and I think data center industry has a huge role to play in that because we already know how to do monthly billing. We already know how to put it in and out in theory in places. They're probably ending up, at our physical spaces. And so there was a real partnership that I think could happen to remake how the industry works and think about, the revenue models, right? And the services. And this is what it has to be. It has to be extra services because I doubt high margin silicon businesses want to take on cheap financing as their new model, right? Yeah. So they're going to have to like have a new lever, right? More value versus just like more financing.
Yeah. Yeah, Zach, and I was going to add in one thing that we talked about taking things out. Sorry, Alex, but makes me think about that little opening around Open 19, which is now called what, Zach? What's Open 19
SSI,
called?
Man, Sustainable and Scalable
SSI.
Infrastructure.
SSI,
yeah,
SSI.
And the way Open 19
it was just
started,
yesterday, Alex. So it's just yesterday. It's
breaking news.
It's breaking news. You heard it here first.
Everybody stop. The data center open source thing has changed its name. Dinner table conversation at 7.
But I always found it intriguing that, kind of genesis, for LinkedIn and Evolve and Open 19 at the very beginning, I think the trajectory of that particular project, I'm going to dumb it down because I'm just a marketing guy, but like get rid of the cables, basically, so you can slide stuff in and slide it out, which makes it a lot easier. I mean, oh my gosh, the beautiful cabling that is done. That's a work of art. You can't undo that. I mean, there's all kinds of gravity around like just put it in and leave it there and don't touch it, monetize it, sweat it, make it last as long as you can. Some of that's okay. But like as we think about how to make technology, which would you say like 70% of it's like
Oh,
making the thing and
I think
getting
it was
it
an
from
IT Renew
Mexico?
study. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting it from China to Mexico, back to Taiwan, and then over to Sweden where it lives. I mean, that's where most of okay, how do we make that more efficient too, and move things
The three
around
R's,
versus
Jacob.
just,
Reduce, reuse, recycle. The middle one is the best. Like if we could just
I
take
think
it from,
that phrase is actually kind of the vintage of Greg's t-shirt.
oh,
It is. It
Yeah.
is.
Reduce, reuse, recycle, right?
I've
And
had
dare. Those
big clients ask me for a cable that they can't get because they shipped everything to a data center, right? And they're missing this one cable, and it needs to be installed
one
now.
thing.
They flew people in from, God knows where to set up servers. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
reduce, reuse, recycle, right? And I think
there we
that certainly holds true for this problem. We just have kind of an interesting pressure because everyone, that sounds good until suddenly it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. I have to do generative AI right now, no matter what, make it go. And, I think we have to, again, offer up solutions that are holistic and we have to solve those challenges as an industry. I don't think that we're just going to expect our enterprise customers to do it, on that side of the house. I think on hyperscale, it's totally different.
yeah.
The regulations come in, the mandates come in, the natural evolution of the technology comes with it. Zach, rebrand aside, anything else you want to share about SSI? Give us a little more color
Yeah,
into the mission of the organization.
totally. So it's a project within the Linux Foundation, and these challenges. It's focused on kind of standards, creating standards. First and foremost, within the rack with Open 19, which was how to have a more efficient rack deployment model. So computers, shared power shelf. So you don't have to put two $600 power supplies in every server with tons of copper. Right? You could have one power shelf. How to reuse sheet metal, so you don't have to like throw out the entire chassis just because you want to upgrade the CPU. And shared cabling, right, which is more efficient, kind of blind mate connected cabling. And so we started there. And what we found out through years of going through this was that there was really a need for an open source community that was not hyperscale dominated. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just think like the needs of somebody who buys 1 million servers a year are just super different from somebody who buys like 5,000 servers a year. And we found the need for a community to come together around these challenges and problem sets. What I think is so cool, and I can learn this from my time in open source and software, which is easier in a lot of ways because you can collaborate with basically a zero cost basis and creating, castles in the sky. It's very different when you're innovating on physical hardware standards, power, cooling. We recently finished the V2 spec, which focused on aligning with OCP and the industry around something as simple as the coupler size and location of liquid cooling cables, right? Like, so we don't keep moving them from side to side. So we don't like have different ones. So that way, like across the world, you could go into a data center and they wouldn't bar you at the door saying no liquid allowed, right? You can't bring a coffee cup in and somebody wants to bring a vat of some weird chemical, right? And so, I think like these issues that we worked on actually showed this need for, and kind of very inspired by open source software, that a diversity of constituents in a very dispersed market, from silicon manufacturers to OEMs to data center financing to like operators to cloud people to end users, who never really have a great forum for coming together and figuring out like, well, should we put the liquid cooling two-phase coupler on the left or on the right? Like, should it be this size or that size? Everybody has an opinion. Like, everybody's got one. But can we agree? Because like we know that if we can agree on a standard or a set of them, it'll all like we'll be able to roll out, say, liquid cooling or heat capture systems, to the
Avoid the
vast majority of
Betamax.
data centers. What's that? Yeah, Betamax. Yeah, it's what it is, right? Just like, can
Avoid
we
the
just
Betamax.
work off of one? And Open 19 is a little bit different than OCP because we don't require any of our members to kind of contribute and open up all of their own IP. So whatever you put inside the server, it's up to you. So like a Supermicro who participates doesn't have to open up all of its, special board designs and whatnot just to participate in a form factor discussion. So that's really powerful. But I think there's more to do. That's why we rebranded the organization to SSI, which is, we think it's more than just this standard related to rack level hardware. So some of the ideas that are being incubated right now are things like reusable packaging, right? If servers are all kind of the same size, why do we basically package them up, and then the second they come into a data center, we throw out all the boxes because the data center operators like, get rid of all those boxes. It's a fire hazard. And then we plug in all the servers to find out like 5 of them don't work and we have no boxes. And we can't ship it anywhere. We can't get it back. Very inefficient. And so like the amount of waste we have just in packaging, just imagine if we could bring a standard or reusability around that, right? Similarly, related to some of these challenges on, how do we describe data destruction? How do we change SLAs to support liquid cooling? Where does it start? Where does it stop? Could we work on one, as an industry and come up with a way that would work for all of us versus trying to all recreate and negotiate and figure out, like, does the SLA stop at the rack? Does it stop at the breaker? Does it stop at the, building system? These things, like, we'll do way better as a community of diverse constituents. So yeah, super excited about leveraging that for further work. I'm no longer the chairperson. Chairman Zach is, it's held by somebody who is a member company, of which Equinix is. So my Trong has taken over that with Chris Lilligan-Stoffel from Cisco. And I'm just an independent member helping to, push and prod and move it along.
So still very much a part of the movement. We're breaking news here. We've got the Open 19 rebrand, and Greg Moss, not a fan of Betamax. Greg, I told you, I moved to Laserdisc a long time ago, dude. Catch up.
Yeah, long time.
So
If you guys ever have if you ever have a spare moment to listen to someone else's podcast,
Tough.
this one aside, right?
Of course, got
Tough, right?
Yeah, research.
But there was a podcast, Planet Money in 2017 or so, did a podcast about going to space because, they were doing something about, the space industry and whatever, and uncovered the CubeSat project, which, started out like Berkeley with a project, but long story short.
Stanford, yeah.
Stanford? Okay,
Yeah.
Berkeley, Stanford, very close by. But either way, the idea of collaboration and form factor and simplicity so you can take something to space kind of been around for a long time. And, we used to joke that it's easier to get a satellite into space than a server into Singapore. And in some ways it's true, which doesn't matter if you're doing it once and just leaving it there and it's not super important and you can plan it a year or two out or whatever refresh cycle you got. But if it's like more urgent / dynamic, which I hope it will become so we're not just over deploying and hoping someone buys it, right? This kind of like standardization and industry levels super impactful. And I think working with, between OCP and SSI, that kind of stuff, it's just, it's really critical. Yeah.
Our dream within Open 19, our dream, Greg, was always like, could you get plus one new server into a market for like $20 and a shipping cost? Like, so that way you could just in time gear when you needed it. Or if you could move it because it's no longer being used over there, but you could move it over here and extend the life.
Yeah.
Like, those things would be huge for our industry. But right now it's so onerous to put something in or take something out. You just don't do it, right? It's too hard.
And that's why the standardization it plays such a critical role.
Yeah, like, is it a slot? I wasn't really inspired. I had learned a lot from the early days of the telecom industry when I think it was probably the Bell system got rolled out in the US, where they're building a central office in like every town of America. Well, guess what they did? They standardized it and made it all feel the same so that they could train an army of technicians who knew how to service it, who could go into it. And we don't have that. Like, we need some standard form factors, especially as we move to more advanced systems like liquid cooling. How would we possibly train and support the data center techs who would be like, hey, so I just got here and I'm on remote hands call and you said I should like fix the RAM disk, but there's all these weird cables coming in and out with fluid. Like, which one do I pull, right? Like, like they're going to say,
I think it's
I
just
can't.
a WhatsApp chat though, isn't it?
It's a WhatsApp chat. Yeah, it's WhatsApp.
Yeah. It's
and so like, I think that like we need some standards just like for the mechanical side of just our industry training, getting people comfortable with. I mean, I remember the first time at Equinix, we walked in with some liquid cooled servers. Like, I got an escalation from the head of facility operations globally saying like, our team is not okay with you having it. What we ended up doing was doing a training program, walking them through, it was dielectric fluid, so it evaporated. Like we showed them how to service it. They needed a lot of support so they could feel comfortable, because they were accountable for maintaining that facility, right? It's just interesting, how much work that we need to do as a community. So we've also just thought about training and documentation as something that SSI can produce for our industry to help accelerate the adoption of liquid cooling in particular, which I think is going to be quite important towards our sustainability goals. All
we
on the
don't think
weekends,
about this
man.
at all, though.
Yeah.
Liquid cooling is something that Alex and I have noodled on for quite some time now, right? Because there's this back and forth on immersion versus chip-based cooling, like a Zutacore, right? And it's just super.
Betamax versus
Yes.
VHS.
Is immersion the Betamax? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we want the Laserdisc one for sure, and then the Sony one if we can have it.
And then
it's a little more difficult to store, but still.
Well, I think that there's a lot of different technologies out there right now. They all have their pros and cons. I think we tried to work, and we worked through a significant amount of these religious battles, right? During our Open 19 V2 working groups, which were every Thursday, 9 to 11, with a bunch of mechanical and fluid engineers on the phone with each other. But what we ended up doing was just backing out to where we could agree on like coupler size across single and two phase. We could agree on flow rates from a building system. We could agree on certain parts that, hey, we need to build 20-year infrastructure around these components. These other things are going to evolve much more, rapidly. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised, Greg, that over time, I'm going to get a little weird here, but like, I don't think we'll have form factors of servers look at all how they look today. Imagine instead of immersed servers that look like 19-inch rack things that you have to be able to put in any IT closet in the world. Well, why not just have like a cartridge that's fully enclosed liquid thing that you put in a slot? Like a video game, like a Nintendo cartridge. You had to blow in it first and put it in. But like, why not a totally different form factor for fully immersed?
Yeah.
Right? Only because it's too hard for us to work as an industry right now. We don't know how to do it. And I do believe that we together in a community-driven way can move to innovate and say, hey, that's possible. Hey, most computers are never going to be touched by a random enterprise. They're going to be done by a service provider. And we have like the 10 biggest data center service providers all hanging out working on this thing. Like we could probably come up with a way where this worked for everybody. And then we wouldn't with all of our, regulatory, environmental, out in the market and made that happen with certain OEMs. Like it's actually, what's funny about our industry is actually pretty concentrated. 10 data center builders, 5 OEMs, 3 silicon people. You have basically the whole industry.
We all know each other.
Yeah, it's not very big, but we just don't have a good. I'm actually excited to be, outside of Equinix because now I can work with other data center operators. Actually, they were a little shy about coming together. It wasn't a good way. We're like, hey, we get Equinix and DLR and DataBank together to talk about how we're all going to do this. And they were like, oh, definitely not. We're not doing that. And I was like, why not? In software, we're used to that, actually, right? Yeah. We do it all the time. And I think in data centers, we don't really have that habit. And so I think getting along that, we've seen a little bit like what Dean's done in infrastructure masons has been a good example. We need to practice those more because together we can make it work. We have a lot of really smart and passionate people who all care about, I believe, the same outcomes. Yeah. We just don't have great mechanisms for making it happen right now.
A bit of a segue, somewhat. Cloud obviously is come up a bunch throughout this conversation. We certainly support our customers on a number of different cloud deployments. I was reading the journal. I could have been last week or last year. I think this article quoted that 2/3 of technology leaders were not seeing the return they expected from their cloud investment, and therefore seeking more flexibility. Frankly, this kind of supports, Greg, what we're doing with our customers and how we often find ourselves advocating for a hybrid solution. I'm curious how this idea of sustainability in the data center relates to cloud or hybrid, and is there anything that we can be doing, given our close connection with our customers, to better emphasize efficiency in that strategy?
Before I have the Smith brothers answer that, I want to add to it,
Because
right?
we will talk for 10 minutes and not let you
No,
ask
no.
any more questions.
For the story. Right,
We need content. Give us more. We want 5 minutes. You know, I've always pushed, and this is one of the things I loved about Equinix, is that you guys ultimately fell into a position of true hybridization, right? You had this fabric, you had the metal, you had the colo, all these fun things. And we've been advocating hybrid for a long time. And so you have these small companies that are saying, I think I want to go to the cloud, right? And they finally get there and they realize it's 30% more expensive than it should be, right? So where do they really belong? But then they're going to lose these efficiencies we all talked about, right? Because they're not following certain guidelines. You know, what's the right thing for them to do? Do they go into a less economic environment, right? For them, that's more, I guess, sustainable from a green standpoint, or do they stay where they are and go into a hybrid environment? I know it's kind of a weird.
Lay down on my couch and tell me about your childhood, right? I mean, I think it's complicated and it is expensive to do various things. I'll give you my perspective. Zach can correct me on all the things he thinks I did wrong. But first of all, I think cloud is an experience, not just like product called public cloud, which we understand as an industry very well. But customers are like, give me that thing where it all works better, faster, and my developers are happy, right? And someone else deals with all the stuff. I think operated infrastructure and operated services are pretty, important when you just can't do it fast enough or great enough yourself. Now, if you can have that cloud experience and have some of your other choices with it too, like, oh, I need it locality, or I want it on different hardware with a different cost basis. I want to own some of it. I want you to lease it to me, OEM, whatever. Hybrid, right? I think, sure, yes. And I think a lot of customers would say, yes, please. Actually, I demand it. But they're probably not going to go backwards on the experience of cloud. Cloud has provided a whole sense of automation and resiliency and global access and all these great things, ecosystems that people don't want to give up. And so I think that, to me, that the cloud just goes everywhere. The experience of cloud, if we do our job right. And then it becomes like, well, what kind of opinions do you have that you want to prioritize? Could be about economics. I think that's the least interesting one of them. Although, of course, it's real, but there's a lot of costs baked into infrastructure that's more than your cloud bill. And I'm not making an argument for public cloud is expensive or cheap. Depends on what you're doing, right? Depends how good you are at managing it. But, we're with a company last year that had major relationships with each public cloud and also a major global deployment in their own data centers. And they had close to 50 people managing procurement for their own data center stuff. And they had one person assigned to each cloud. That was pretty good, clear economic incentive. It didn't have anything to do with their cloud bill, obviously. Do they have the people? Are they keeping, what kind of expertise are they having in their company? What does it cost for them to do something? How quickly could they respond to an opportunity? So I think it's super nuanced, and the kind of cloud repatriation economic angle to me falls a little flat. I think it's real, and economics for things you really care about that you're building your business on, that's like obviously critical. So, okay, Zach, correct the Jacob.
Well, I was going to put two things. I totally agree. The first one is that for most people, I think cloud is really what I saw with enterprise, really about digital transformation, which I used to hate that word. I was like, oh, that's just word salad, right? But actually, it's like a real process people go through. They're investing in the digital bones of their company and getting to a point where they can leverage off of kind of more automation, or I'm going to call it primitives that are highly automatable and global, really helps with that, right? Helps with the transformation in the people and the capabilities of a large company. And I think that's pretty different from most people's IT, right? Moving into a place where technology is our weapon versus it's our cost driver. So I think that's a big part of why people go and use cloud. And so I don't think it's as easy as thinking about hybrid, because you have to think is my organization ready for that? Do I have the tools and capabilities to do that in a hybrid manner? Do I have is my service provider, when I'm going to do an on-prem or an outsourced colo or something like that, able to deliver that to me, or do I have that internally? Because my real goal is to get developers to have cycle times of a week versus a year. That's my real goal, maybe.
Yeah, or
right?
other related goals there that we talked about for the previous hour. Where you want someone as a service provider to manage your problems and opportunities related to sustainability or security or whatnot. Yeah. And so I think hybrid for sure is the way. The question is who's helping you do it, and how much are you doing on your own?
If
That
they're
was my
having
next
enough
point.
time going into a single environment, how are they going to struggle to get? I understand it. It's a challenge. And Jacob, just to correct myself, maybe I didn't explain myself correctly. I was referring more to the big three, right? It gets really expensive, but
Yes, the public clouds. Mm-hmm.
there's a whole layer of these secondary cloud providers, right? Like whether it's Deft or High Velocity or whoever, right? That do
Yeah,
a really,
right.
really good job at exactly what
Yeah,
they're doing. It may not have every bell and whistle, but the cost basis is substantially
yeah.
low. So,
I
Well,
think I forget if it was AMD, Zach, back in the day, a couple of years ago, used to really think about specialty cloud providers, right? Like
yeah.
right now, we're like the public clouds and the tier twos, and that's kind of industry parlance for like how big are you? And I think we might see, the mobility and the telecommunications and the various, the AI clouds, just as much as we will the sort of big guys and small guys. And that's a prediction. We'll see if it
I think
happens, but.
I think it's absolutely going towards specialized clouds. MongoDB Atlas, e.g., the database cloud, is a big business now, and
yeah.
people rely on it. And like, I want that expertise of that one thing versus, the kind of overarching one-stop shop, right? And I think people are getting much more comfortable with that. They already do it with security, like with Akamai or Cloudflare, and I think that it's going to become more and more common. The second point I was going to make was around global. I think we in our industry do a really poor job, and I'm going to use the whipping boys and gals of data center and OEM. If you want to, most companies I've worked with over the past couple of years think in a global lens, right? With technology, they're thinking everywhere. My customers are everywhere. My users are everywhere. I need to have the flexibility to be kind of everywhere-ish. But data center companies sign contracts with you and assign sales reps like on your local on where the data center is. Like it's all very localized. It's super as if we're going to roll up in our pickup truck and rack and stack a server in the rack. Like that's got to change. You got to
Yeah.
think globally, right? Which means global contracting, global usage, portability, single account team, like US dollar
Same
pricing
P&L.
everywhere.
Same
Like,
P&L.
one bill, right? Like these things are such a burden, like, because we haven't evolved the way we work to be global. Like we're still thinking like, well, I got my sales team for the Northeast using the thingamajiggers and we're going to, assign you there. And it's just not like how I think most companies are acting. So cloud has done that. Cloud is
Yeah.
like really good. I always thought that most of what I've done in my career of cloud and hosting has not been turn computers and networks on, but has actually been metering, billing, global contracting, and consumption models. And that was like the actual thing that we worked on almost all the time, which is why, Greg, built billing systems and metering systems and the invoicing things like to make that happen. And I think the second part of that, is just the kind of experience and self-consumption model, right? That whole PLG concept, product-led growth, e.g., the user, the human, the creator, the developer, the sysadmin needs to have access to things is still a gate right now. Like the whole 0 to 9 months to be able to put a rack of computers in Sydney is a total buzzkill to somebody who is, paid for innovation, right? Like, yeah, what did you ship this month? Is like, they're going to go somewhere else where they're going to happen.
Yeah.
And negotiating like a 3-year term on a something or other so I can try it out is just a non-starter. And so we're going to have to, I think, as an industry, do some work there between OEMs and data center companies, which currently, frankly, it's just kind of like running through a barbed wire fence. You want to go global.
Yeah.
And that's not very fun.
Not fun. So I hear. We have a lot of technology leaders listening, owners of IT budgets. We've covered a lot of ground. I think, Greg, in fact, we're going to need another onion because this one's pretty well peeled, but not a tear in any of the eyes on this podcast, which is a good sign. Why don't we go in reverse birth order? How about that? One piece of advice for the listener when it comes to sustainability and be it the data center or more broadly.
I got it. It's easy. Ted Lasso gave it to me last night. It's so easy. It's like curiosity, right? You got to be curious about these things, not just try to get rid of them. And so whether it's sustainability or the evolution of technology, like AI, developers, software, open source, these topics are not going away. Be curious, right? Be curious about how they work, how they could work. Set aside. I always used to give advice to my clients when I was in the consulting business. It's like, you don't do it all the time, but how about like an 80-20 rule or 70-30. Make sure that you're spending 20-30% of your time being curious about things that probably don't make sense to you right now, but are going to be an important part of your language in your tomorrow. So Ted Lasso says, be curious. He was just quoting Walt Whitman, so we'll go with that.
I would play a little bit off of it and say, like, listen, there's no silver bullet. Nobody's got this figured out, right? And so let's lean in as a community. Most complex, hard problems we can solve together. And so find the right partners, create open forums, join organizations where you can talk about it, be a little bit vulnerable. Like, you don't have all the answers. That's okay. No does anybody else. But we can learn from each other and we can probably do better together. And so finding those partners and ecosystems that you can kind of invest some of your time in, as Jacob's putting, maybe it's your 10%, your 20%, maybe your 5%. Like, you put it up there, you put it out in the universe, and you spend some time with people who also are thinking about it in an open and vulnerable way. I think we'll move the ball forward.
Leave it to Zach and Jacob Smith when asked for professional advice to give us life advice. I don't know where else we
it's so
could.
much easier.
Jacob is 3 years late to Ted Lasso, so
I was going to ask.
I'm like totally late, but
That's
it's
not
now
a
it's
new
fresh again. It's coming
show,
back.
right? Are you going to go to Twin Peaks next? Is that next?
Yeah.
on the list?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, let me take some notes here.
It's
Hold
going
on.
to start soon.
But in all seriousness, I've been saying be
No,
a
I think it's
goldfish,
Schitt's
and
Creek, actually. That's
Jacob's been looking at me like, what?
I was excited
be a
Jacob,
goldfish.
when
What are you
Zach said you
talking
were going to be
about?
joining us. It was pretty cool. And Zach, I miss us.
You guys go way back, way back. This doesn't have to be the last time you see each other or we talk on the podcast. I certainly
I'm
hope
pretty
not.
sure I knew Greg when he had some hair on his head.
I did.
That's now that's
Steve Callahan, but I did have some hair on my head.
Well, not everyone can be.
Greg with hair. That should be the logo for the UPSTACK podcast. Well,
Yeah.
Jacob, Zach, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be with you both. And I think our first 4-person podcast went pretty well, I must say.
Yes.
And as always, we're scratching the surface here because the onion's gone, so I'm turning to a surface. But we look forward to picking up the conversation, watching as sustainability, efficiency continues to evolve within the greater industry, not just data center. Things are happening. Let's pay attention. Let's be curious. And let's tune in to the next episode of the UPSTACK podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody.